Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Madi Kay, this is my big chair, and today I read all of Emily Henry so you don't have to. If you like this video, make sure to let me know down in the comments. Tell me what were your favorite Emily Henry books overall. Let me know if you're a fan of Emily Henry and which book is your favorite. Also, don't forget to subscribe down below if you want to see more Emily Henry content. And if you would like something to make your reading of Emily Henry's books even more enjoyable, make sure to check out the link to my Emily Henry bingo card down below. Question for today's video is, what is the perfect secret recipe for a beach read romance book? Is it the quirky side characters? Is it the picture perfect setting? Or is it the romance between our two main characters? Let me know down in the comments below, and without further ado, let's get into it. Emily Henry may be one of the most prolific romance authors of our time. She first rose to prominence in the thick of the pandemic. Right when the entire world was shut down and we were all desperate for escapism, Emily Henry released her debut romance novel, Beachread. And this was marketed as a perfect summer romance with this perfectly crafted pastel cover, and it made her readers very nostalgic for a much different time. And ever since then, Emily Henry has religiously pumped out at least one book a year, and you can find her pastel-colored covers lining the bookshelves at your local bookstore or Barnes & Noble. This woman's name is just as ubiquitous as Ali Hazelwood or Abby Jimenez in the realm of romance authors, more specifically contemporary romance. After she went viral, Emily Henry has dominated the New York Times bestseller list ever since, rivaling the success of Tessa Bailey, Abby Jimenez, and even Ali Hazelwood herself. Another author that I've also covered on this channel, believe it or not, you will see some similarities between her and Emily Henry. These romance authors definitely seem to follow a very specific formula, and what better to illustrate that than with an Emily Henry reading guide, a bingo card full of Emily Henry cliches, and you will find that some of these cliches or tropes are not just idiosyncratic to her books, but to many of the books in the romance genre as well. Emily Henry falls into the same trap as many of her other romance authors by following the exact same formula over and over and over, to the point where it feels like all of her books are starting to blend together. All of her characters look and act and sound the same, and despite her popularity, the real question is Emily Henry actually worth all the hype and worth your time? Are her books any decent, and if so, which ones are her best? And these are the questions I'm going to be answering today. But before we dive into Emily Henry's books, I do want to illustrate to you what I consider to be the Emily Henry formula that you will also find outlined on your Emily Henry bingo cards. And this formula is as follows. Considering the fact that Emily Henry's main characters that are tragically straight and so white they're practically translucent. All of Emily Henry's books therefore must include at least one person of color and at least one couple that is same-sex oriented, or a character that does identify as someone in the LGBTQ+ community. And this is mainly due to the fact that Emily Henry, like many other white romance authors before her, must find a way to check off that diversity box and get some brownie points for representation, so that way their books don't seem too whitewashed. Unfortunately, these characters are so superfluous to the story that if you were to take them out of the book, no one would really even notice and wouldn't affect the story at all. And because Emily Henry does like to delve into the metafiction, one of her main characters usually has a writing or book adjacent job. So they work in the publishing industry or they are a writer. Our female main character always has daddy issues, and the title is usually mentioned in the book at least once or has absolutely nothing to do with the topic of the book overall, which is something that I like to call false advertisement. Our main characters are usually from a big city like Boston or New York, and for the duration of the story, they usually spend it in a very small town setting or even a beach setting. And like many of the other romance books, she usually has not one, but at least two of these tropes. Her characters usually start off the story by being enemies to lovers, or in rare cases, they actually start off as friends. There is the occasional opposites attract trope, but in every single one of her stories, her characters do struggle with miscommunication. And also following the generic romance formula, all of Emily Henry's books usually include a third act breakup to not only increase attention at the very end of her story, but to also prolong the inevitable. Let's be real here, none of us even thought or suspected for even a minute that any of her books wouldn't end with anything short of a happily ever after. And because our setting is involved in a small town or a beachy island where our characters are isolated and forced together in the forced proximity trope, which is arguably one of the laziest tropes to date. Emily Henry's books are also riddled with quirky characters who always root for our main love interest to get together in the end. The vast majority of Emily Henry's books, our female main character and our male main character actually have a history together. In at least a couple of her books, there is a competition involved, whether or not it's writing a book and trying to get it published before your opponent, or trying to see who can outlast each other in a bet. There's usually at least one estranged or dead family member. Each of her books does have at least one smut scene, and it usually takes place in an outdoor environment. That's right, Emily Henry is a big fan of writing very really public, intimate moments between our two main characters. Our main characters also have unique or very eccentric names, and just to prove that our female main character has a life outside of her job and her boyfriend, she usually has at least one obligatory BFF. And last but not least, this is something that is incredibly specific to Emily Henry and her books. Emily Henry, for whatever reason, really loves to compare female bodies to volcanoes. She always likes to describe her women as when they are getting turned on or horny, that they are feeling a certain way, and that their bodies feel a way that is very equitable to a volcano exploding.
Krakatoa!
She'll use words like molten, or lava, or explosive, or even volcanic to describe how her characters are feeling. Personally, and this is a PSA from your friendly neighborhood book vlogger, but if you're feeling a little bit of a hunk of burnin' love down there, you might want to go see a doctor, because that sounds very painful. Alright, that is everything that you can expect from an Emily Henry book. Let's dive into the book that started it all, the revolutionary Beachread. And if you're worried about any spoilers, I would invite you to skip ahead until you see me put up a different cover for a different book, so that way I don't ruin anything for you. I will also be outlining the trigger warnings, even though for the most part, all Emily Henry's books are usually pretty PC. She doesn't really go into too many graphic details of the tragic or traumatic things that have happened to her characters. She usually just mentions it and then moves on, which is something that I do appreciate in my romance books. All I want is a little bit of escapism. I'm not here to be traumatized, I'm here to be entertained. So Beachread is an enemies to lovers story between two writers, January and Gus. Now January, who is our main protagonist, just moved into her father's lake house shortly after he passed away. She's essentially there to pack up his belongings and sell the house. And it is at this time that January finds out that her parents' marriage was a complete sham and that her father was actually living a double life at this lake house. Prior to moving in, January had no idea that this lake house even existed. This was actually the house that her father was living with his mistress, a local woman who still lives in the area but was properly booted out once her father died. And since they weren't legally married, she had absolutely no tie to the house, so now it's January's responsibility. And January, who is also in a bit of a writer's slump, is motivated to get in, pack up everything, sell the house, and then promptly leave. This is very traumatizing, and the fact that she has a pending deadline for her next book is not helping whatsoever. And the mistress that was unceremoniously turned out of the house, we don't really get to see her much throughout the book, but it does offer some awkward moments from time to time when January does run into her in town. Being in a small town, it's very difficult to escape your past, even the one you didn't know that you had. Nothing like a bit of good family drama, huh? So after 1 week of moving in, January discovers that she has a very annoying neighbor, Gus. Now Gus turns out to be one of her rivals in college. They were both in the same writing program together, and when they were workshopping their stories, Gus, who did not like her story, had quite a few negative things to say about it, thus hurting January's feelings, and throughout the duration of her college career, she saw him as enemy number one. And the point of this backstory was to make January look like a sensitive, sympathetic protagonist. But as someone who did take creative writing classes in college, this made her look very childish, bitter, and even resentful person. I'm sorry, but part of being a writer is accepting criticism and learning how to get a thick skin, because believe it or not, you're going to have to face a lot of rejection and you're going to have to learn how to take it in stride. And stomping your feet and throwing a toddler tantrum because someone didn't like your story is not going to help you in your writing career long term. There are 8 billion people in the world. Odds are someone's not going to like your story, and you're just going to have to get used to that. Shia goes over to Gus's house with a noise complaint, as apparently they were partying a little too hard and it was disrupting her writing time, which in my opinion made her out to be even more of an annoying character and even worse, a Karen. Not to mention, it seems incredibly strange that she thinks that writing at 12 or even 2 a.m. in the morning while she's fighting off sleep is a good strategy to have for getting out of her writer's block. But I digress. Over the next couple of days, January and Gus fall into this rhythm in which they are both out on their patios at the same time trying to write, because it turns out Gus also is experiencing some writer's block. January's career as a chick lit author is growing rather stale and she's running out of ideas, and Gus is a literary fiction author, two very different genres for two very different people. And over time they get to talking and they both talk about how difficult it is to write in their genres and how the other one doesn't quite understand. They don't take the other person seriously, so Gus decides to strike up a bet. He challenges January to write outside of her own comfort zone and in the realm of literary fiction, and then January retaliates and dares him to write romance because it's not as easy as he thinks it. And then whoever writes their book first and gets it published by their agent wins the bet. But don't get me wrong, I like it when authors experiment with their craft. I like it when they try to break out of their own mold and expand and challenge themselves to write something new. However, the premise for both of their books were so insane that the way that they described each of their books, they were not interesting at all. This idea was not executed well. Personally, I would have avoided these books in the bookstore if they were real, but at least the two of them were striking out on the town and doing some research. And they start to invite each other along to their research trips. As they are embarking on these trips together, these two go from being enemies to friends to lovers. They have this burgeoning attraction for each other, which they're both trying to fight off for the sake of the plot. They almost do the deed once, but because Gus did not bring protection, they decide to wait into a better time. And that better time comes in the form of a research trip to a crime scene. And this part of the book was when I began to question my own sanity because I could not believe what I was reading. So Gus takes January on this trip into the woods to this camp. Now, this camp used to be the home of a cult. Think Jonestown or Charles Manson. And this cult lived in these trailers, and the cult leader snapped because he felt like he was losing power. And he did the one thing that all cult leaders do when they are forced into a corner and they have to fight their way out. They take the entire cult with them. So he burned the campsite down, trailers and all. And one trailer, as they're approaching it, Gus reveals that this was a nursery and not a plant nursery. I could not believe that Emily Henry would include such a traumatic and disturbing bit of true crime in her book that's supposed to be a cozy beach read. I'm not sure if she put it in there for shock value, but I think it really detracted from the rest of her story. And it got even worse because later on it's revealed that they're camped right next to this campsite where a massacre took place where women, children, and men were killed, and they set up camp. And then Gus reveals that, don't worry, this time he brought protection so that way they could do the deed for the first time 20 paces away from a crime scene. I wish I was making this up. I was flabbergasted, to say the least, when I read this. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to think about a massacre while I'm also trying to root for characters to hook up for the first time. I thought that was incredibly out of touch. I thought it was tonally all over the place. Worst of all, it was not romantic in the slightest. I'm not here to kink shame, but I think there is a time and a place to do certain deeds where it is dignified and respectful of the dead, and in a place where you most likely would not be haunted by ghosts. Food for thought. So after reading that scene, I wanted to bleach my eyes, but unfortunately we were only halfway through the story, so I just had to persevere whether I liked it or not, all for the sake of research. Again, what does this cult have anything to do with Gus writing a romance book? I have absolutely no idea, because at no time during this story do we ever get to read a passage from either one of their books. Despite the fact that their relationship seems to be going rather well, Gus drops this major bomb that he is actually married, and he and his wife are separated because she wanted to go have an affair with someone else, but because she wants to have her cake and eat it too, once that affair didn't work out, she wants to go back on her plan B with Gus. And when January finds this out, she is obviously very upset, and then she goes back to her home and she refuses to speak to Gus. And then when things couldn't get much worse, her father's affair partner showed up at her doorstep begging for January's forgiveness and urging her to also forgive her father, the man who lied to her for years and completely upended her life when he died. Something about this woman struck a chord in January. She decides to actually read the note that her father left her, and surprise, surprise, the entire time he is justifying his decisions, and even at one point indirectly blames his family for making him feel unhappy and pushing him to start the affair with the other woman. Does that sound like an apology to you? Yeah, it doesn't to me either. But because this is a romance and January supposedly is fresh out of her first lobotomy, she decides to forgive her father and Gus, who is divorcing his wife and wants to start a relationship with her. And can you guess who at the very end of this story wins the bet? Yep, it is none other than January herself, who wrote a literary fiction book which is all about a family at a circus, which, I'm not gonna lie to you, made me think of Robin's origin story in Batman Forever. And the worst part of this book to me was the fact that there was absolutely no beach reading until one scene at the very end of the story. This was just false advertisement in the worst way possible. I did not expect any of the twists and turns in this book, and that was in a negative way. The cult, the affair partners, the secret marriage, the posthumous letter from her father, these elements didn't really belong in a romance book, and it really tarnished my reading experience of Beachread, and that is why Beachread is my least favorite Emily Henry book to date, because I believe that it wasn't very appropriate for the genre, and it diverged so greatly from the original plotline in ways that just didn't enrich the story at all, but rather retracted from it in a way that wasn't pleasurable at all. So yes, it is with a heavy heart that I have given this book a 1 out of 5 stars. And unless you're a fan of death cults, narcissistic fathers, cheating, affairs, and mentions of dead children in your romance books, this book may not be for you either. And it's because of these elements that this book did not feel like a very fun beach read for me, but at least her next book was a little bit more enjoyable, albeit not by much. Next up, we have People We Meet on Vacation. I will say, even though People We Meet on Vacation still wasn't my favorite Emily Henry book, at least it did not involve death cults or bloody massacres, so that was at least 1 point in its favor. This is Emily Henry's second summer romance book, and this is probably one of her most beloved and popular books amongst her fans. People We Meet on Vacation is a second chance at romance book between two friends, Poppy and Alex. Poppy and Alex met in college, and every summer they went on a trip together. But because of an incident that happened years ago, they no longer are as close as they used to be. And a lot of their vacations were paid for by Poppy's magazine because she's a travel journalist, so she would go on these exquisite vacations and she would bring Alex along, but something happened 2 years ago that actually tore them apart. And our story picks up in the present time where Poppy is reminiscing of their friendship and then slowly comes to the conclusion that she is actually in love with Alex, and she decides to take a chance on romance and invite him for another vacation and confess her love for him. When she reaches out to proposition him, he actually tells her that he's going to be in Palm Springs, California for his sister's wedding. And surprisingly, he invites her along as his +1. And his sister, who has secretly been rooting for them both to get together, has absolutely no issue with it. She is very happy to see Poppy once again. So Poppy flies over under the guise that everything about their vacation is being funded by her work, despite the fact that they did not actually want to hire her to write about Palm Springs, California, because apparently it wasn't exotic enough. So Poppy's trying to cover up for the fact that their trip is not as eloquent as the ones they've taken in the past. As we're watching these two in the present, the book does oscillate back and forth between the past and the present. They're now staying at a cheap motel in Palm Springs where the air conditioning is broken. They're going to the dinosaur museum where all the dinosaurs are slightly deflated due to the heat. Overall, these two are just not having the same amount of fun and is not quite living up to her expectations. She's very much disappointed in the quality of this trip and ashamed at the fact that she couldn't provide Alex with a wonderful vacation like they did in the past. And Alex knows that she's not being entirely truthful, and she does confess that her work didn't actually hire her to go out on this trip, and like its predecessor, People We Meet on Vacation doesn't focus on the people they meet on vacation. In fact, many of their interactions with these minor characters are very fleeting, and they really do not affect the story at all. Arguably, you could take them out, and the plot would move on as if they never existed in the first place. This book was very reminiscent of the book One Day because it follows this formula where these characters toe the line between their platonic feelings for each other and their romantic ones, until finally they cannot take it anymore and they confess their love for each other and hook up on a balcony. But don't worry, the hotel only has 2 other tenants who are coincidentally located right below them. Let's just hope that these poor folks have the TV turned all the way up and are very sound sleepers so they don't overhear Poppy and Alex doing the devil's tango. Unless they are voyeurs, because then they might actually enjoy it. I'm not here to kink shame. I'm just saying that's just not how I would personally want to spend a vacation in Palm Springs. Once these two finally decide that they want to take their relationship to the next level, they attend the wedding, but because Emily Henry, true to form, needs to have a third act breakup scene during the wedding, the two of them decide to have a very public argument where they talk about the nature of their lives. Because these two have grown apart for quite some time, and they now each have their own jobs and lives outside of each other. And they're not sure if their love for each other is going to be sustainable, because these two built their friendship on the highs of amazing vacations and trips to exotic places like Greece and Switzerland, and they are worried that they're going to bore each other to bits. Because vacations cannot last forever, and inevitably you're going to have to go home and live out the less exciting parts of your life. So these two are not exactly sure how to best navigate their relationship, but their love for each other supersedes any concerns that they may have. They decide to give their relationship the good old college try and make it official. Overall, this book was not as concerning or disturbing disturbing as Beachread was, and I think that's why I liked it a little bit better. This book definitely felt more like a cozy beach read. However, I was still very annoyed that once again the title lied to me, and this book had absolutely nothing to do with the people that we meet on vacation. I know it's a very nitpicky thing to complain about, but I don't like misleading titles. And this book is no exception to that. And the worst part about this book was when we did meet those people we meet on vacation, they turned out to be way more engaging characters than Poppy and Alex. And that is never a good sign. It was also in this book that I noticed an Emily Henry trend. All of her characters are basically the same. They're very vanilla and they don't really stand out from each other. Honestly, in a police lineup, I don't think I'd be able to pick them out. And truth be told, I don't think their love interest would be able to either. And this is when I also noticed a pattern of the outdoor smut scenes and the fact that Emily Henry also likes to equate female anatomy to that of volcanoes by using words like heat, lava, explode, molten, and it is incredibly distracting. Once you see these trends, you can't unsee them. Luckily for me though, Emily Henry does start to abandon this metaphor in her later books, but it just comes across as very redundant in which you use that metaphor 20 times. Mix it up, get creative. There are other ways to describe a woman when she is in the mood. Personally, I feel like the volcano metaphor is best suited for men, especially when they get explosive. Krakatoa! The one good thing I will say about Emily Henry and her smut scenes is that they don't dominate the books entirely. They don't detract from the story in any way. They're just thrown in there for a little bit of romance, and you know what? One or two smut scenes really doesn't hurt. As long as they are consensual and both characters are having fun, I'm not really here to yuck anyone's yum. I just tend to skim over them because they're all written the same, and there's only so many ways that you can describe certain body parts before it starts to be eccentric and peculiar and just downright outlandish, which is not something that I can say about a lot of booktok books because a lot of them are 50, even 75% smut, and there really is no story. It's like a ballet of sorts, in which the story is introduced in the first 10 to 15 minutes, and then the next 2 hours is just watching your characters dance, in more ways than one. The next book on the list is one I have neutral feelings about, but a lot of her fans really rave about, and that is Book Lovers. Now, fun fact, Book Lovers was actually my first entry into the Emily Henry universe, so I took this as a very encouraging start, and unfortunately, after reading this one, I was very much disappointed. So Book Lovers is an enemies to lovers story between Nora and Charlie. Nora is a cutthroat career woman and a literary agent in New York, and her meet cute with Charlie was not very cute. In fact, these two did not get along. Charlie, who is a prestigious editor at this time, is meeting up with Nora, who is trying to pitch him her author's book. This is a writer who needs to be handled with kid gloves because she is very delicate. Now, I know that writers are a neurotic bunch, but this just took it to a whole new level. Charlie has a very good reputation. He is a well-renowned editor with many accomplishments under his belt. I do also want to point out that, like Ali Hazelwood, all of Emily Henry's male main characters, or MMCs, have to be more successful, famous, or rich than the female main character, or FMC, and this book is no exception. God forbid we read a romance book in which both the man and the woman are equally respected in their line of work. I really wish we could see that kind of equality in a romance book. I guess that's just too much to ask in the world of fourth wave feminism. Not exactly how I would picture us furthering the feminist agenda, but okay. Time for us to close that wage gap. Nora is very upset, but luckily, Nora does find a different editor who can help her author get her book published, and she becomes incredibly successful. Nora came across in this instant as very childish and vindictive because Charlie is just doing his job. If he knows a book is not going to sell, why would he take a chance on it? A lot of the issues that I have with the FMCs in Emily Henry's books is that they fault men for making rational decisions or very logical decisions that could affect them professionally or personally. It also makes them come across as these children who need to be guided in the right direction and need to learn a lesson, whereas the man is this paternal figure who helps them discover this part of themselves. Flash forward to the present time, and Nora is actually taking a trip with her sister Libby. Now, Libby is actually pregnant with her very first child, and she is trying to find a nice suburban small town for her and her husband to raise their family together. So a little background on Libby and Nora. When they were younger, their father abandoned them and their mother raised them on her own. Then when they were both teenagers, Nora's mother died, and then she had to raise Libby on her own. So she had to make a lot of sacrifices for her younger sister. Unfortunately, Libby is not a very grateful sister. In fact, she never really thanks Nora for anything. Instead, she tramples on the memory of their dead mother, and she comes across as a bit of a spoiled brat. Come to think of it, Nora is a bit of a human doormat. She lets her sister walk all over her, take advantage of her when she's being too nice, and her very sensitive author does something which I don't think is very ethical. It also is a bit of a slap in the face for her agent. So this author is writing a story that is loosely based off of The Devil Wears Prada, and she made the devil character, or the Miranda character, very similar to Nora. And Nora is understandably not very happy about this because, first of all, no one wants to be vilified in a fictional book that thousands, millions of people could potentially read, but also because she doesn't like the fact that her writer, someone that she considers to be a friend, is writing her in a way where she comes across as this cold, manipulative businesswoman. Suffice to say, she doesn't like that she's being punished for putting her career over a man. This is not something that men are ever punished for, at least not in books like this. Now, the small town that they are traveling to, called Sunshine Falls, just so happens to be the hometown of Nora's greatest arch nemesis, Charlie. What a coincidence. I did not see that coming. As Libby is house hunting, Nora and Charlie start to run into each other because in a small town, there's only so many places you can go. Then eventually they overcome their differences and they start to develop crushes for each other. And then Nora realizes that her first impression of Charlie wasn't exactly correct because he actually is a pretty decent guy. After all, it's very hard to hate a guy that wears flannels. Am I right, ladies? This just strikes me as a Luke and Lorelai fan fiction book. For those of you who are getting Gilmore Girl vibes, you are definitely on the right track. So Nora's main conflict is everyone criticizes her because she values her career over her personal life. She and her sister don't exactly have the best relationship, and a lot of that really derives from their lack of communication and a difference of opinions when it comes to their childhood. Nora likes to put on the rose-colored glasses when she's perceiving her mother, whereas Libby has a more realistic approach and criticizes a lot of the decisions that their mother made because it financially and mentally impacted them in a negative way. And it was very strange that this woman who prides herself on her career is acting very unprofessionally. And her client, who she fought tooth and nail for, is also taking advantage of her and using her likeness to inspire an entire story because she hit a writer's block. And she will also be capitalizing on Nora's persona in her stories, way more than Nora ever would. Not to mention that this woman, at the smallest hint of criticism, needs to be talked off the ledge and coddled like a child. So Nora and Libby have this big blowout fight because Nora has separation anxiety because Libby is the only family that she has left, and she doesn't like the fact that they're going to be living so far apart. And she struggles with the fact that she wants to stay in Sunshine Falls with Charlie, even though her job is in New York. But believe it or not, you could be a literary agent for pretty much anywhere, and she does decide to settle down in the small town with her sister, and they all live happily ever after. For me, the worst part about this book is the fact that they never really talk about books all that much. There is a book club in town, but even then they use it as more of a vessel in order to gossip. And between these two characters, I don't think they even mentioned their favorite books once, nor did I actually see them reading books at all. They just talked about them in this throwaway way, in which it was more like business rather than pleasure. So once again, we had a book that had absolutely nothing to do with the title, and overall the plot was just very forgettable. And truth be told, months after I read this book, I completely forgot what it was about, and that is really what motivated me to give this book a 2 out of 5 stars because there wasn't anything particularly special about it. It just faded into the background of all the other books that I read that year. It didn't stand out, and it just felt like another stereotypical small town romance, just like the other ones that have come before it. Her writing style is pretty basic, but I will say that this book is actually quite nice because there are little to no content warnings at all when you disclude the parental death and neglect. But unfortunately for me, the characters just came across as very bothersome. They got under my skin, and not in a good way. And this book did not need to be 400 pages long. It could have been half its size and still accomplished the same amount. Personally, I don't think romance books should be any longer than 200 pages. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this book, book lovers. Not the best one, but it definitely was an improvement from her other books. And now we're going to talk about one of her most polarizing books to date, and that has got to be none other than Happy Place. Now this book sparked a lot of commentary around the ending, so if you haven't read the book yet or you don't know what the ending is, I would greatly encourage you to skip ahead because it is the crux for why I didn't like this particular entry in the Emily Henry universe. This was also the book that I noticed that there were some printing errors. I don't know if you guys can can see that, but some of the pages are rather uneven. You can see that one place there where the pages jut out slightly more than the others do, and it was very uneven. And I was very shocked by this because a lot of time and care really goes into these books, and making little factory errors like that can really speak to the quality of the book overall, and the time and care that the people who worked on it really put into it. A lot more time and effort could have gone into this one to at least avoid the fallout that a lot of her fans had regarding the ending. I went into this book with mixed feelings.
This is either really good or really bad.
And I was pleasantly surprised in the very beginning, and then once we hit the 80% mark, that's just when everything went downhill. And this book follows our main characters, Harriet and Wynne. They used to be engaged, and now they're not anymore. The only problem is that because these two lack basic communication skills that most adults should have, they have not been able to tell their very close-knit group of friends because they are cowards. And they don't want to break the news on the eve of their vacation. These friends go on vacation to the same place every single year, to Maine, and they are forced to share a room together. So this book falls into the one-bed trope trap. They have to have a fake dating relationship to pretend to their friends that they're actually together, and you may ask yourself why? Why would they continue to put up this front? Well, it turns out that this vacation is their friend's wedding weekend, and Harriet and Wynne do not want to ruin the happy couple's time, so they just decide to prolong their secret, but there are even more secrets lying under the surface because both Harriet and Wynne are still harboring secret feelings for each other. And they want to get back together, but there is just one obstacle standing in their path. And that obstacle was a big blowout fight they had before they broke up. So what happened was that Wynne is a wood carver of sorts, so he's very artsy. And he and Harriet were butting heads because of their conflicting schedules. So Harriet is a neurosurgeon. So she is taking up this residency despite the fact that she's not passionate about it, and her extreme schedule is really cutting into her time with Wynne. Now during this time, Wynne also lost his father, and Harriet got mad at him, and hold on to your pants for this one because it's a doozy. Harriet is upset that Wynne was upset that his father died, and it drove a wedge into their relationship, and they broke up because of it. Yeah. And then Wynne tries to explain himself to Harriet. Harriet is mad at him that he was mourning, grieving the loss of his father. I'm sorry, does that sound like a very good partner to you, that the minute that you are grieving the loss of a loved one, that they decide to pull away and get angry at you for going through a very traumatizing time in your life? Doesn't seem to really bode well for a long-term relationship, in my opinion. It was revealed that Wynne broke up with Harriet because he felt like he couldn't provide for her. He felt like he wasn't special enough for her. So coupled with the fact that he just lost his father and he wasn't exactly in the best mood, he just left. And the friends also have this very explosive fight at the very end because the one that was orchestrating the entire vacation felt like all of their friends were growing apart. And then revealed that the whole wedding was just a farce. Their friends decide to ultimately not get married because they're also going through relationship troubles of their own, and they use this wedding as this grand gesture to shove all of their problems under the rug and just ignore them. But because it's another sappy romance, they all kiss and make up, and then her friend, one of the nicer friends might I add, is actually pregnant after a trip to a sperm bank, and she and her partner are very excited to welcome this new baby into their family. Then the other couple, the one who didn't end up getting married, are now working through their issues and are still together. And then Harriet realizes that she is not passionate about being a doctor, and then in a plot twist that confused a lot of Emily Henry's readers, we find out that Harriet's real passion is actually pottery, and she wants to abandon her life as a doctor with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt to go live in Montana with Wynne and be a potter. And the whole time I read this book, all I wanted for someone to say was, "You're a potter, Harry," and no one said it. I feel like that was a real lost opportunity, especially in the humor department, because I don't find Emily Henry's books to be that funny. So a lot of people criticize Emily Henry for this very unrealistic ending, and I get it. It's a romance, it's supposed to be fantastical, like you're living this fairy tale where everything positive happens and nothing can really go wrong, but there's only so far where we can suspend our disbelief. And this ending was the point where a lot of her readers were wondering whether or not Emily Henry was losing her touch. Personally, I was never a stan of hers, so I was just tickled by the ending, and I thought it was just very funny how ludicrous it was to suggest that a doctor would abandon years of work and med school to go to Montana and live out the rest of her days as a potter. This also came out of nowhere. Up until that point, we never really knew much about Harriet enough to know that she wanted to be a potter, and I don't think she's going to be very successful enough, realistically, to be able to pay back all of her student debt and maintain a decent life with her and Wynne. Not to mention the fact fact that she could still practice her neurosurgeon residency in Montana. It's not like they aren't in desperate need of doctors. You could go over there, be a doctor, and then be a potter on the side as a hobby. There's so many more realistic ways to go about this, and to me, this book was another swing and a miss. It was a huge disappointment for not only her fans, but also for people who were on the fence with Emily Henry, like myself. Even though I started out this book thinking it was going to be a 3 out of 5 stars, I actually rated it a 1.5 out of 5 stars because the ending for me is what really makes or breaks a book, and this one just did not deliver. However, if you are in the market for being entertained, I definitely would recommend that one because there are still a lot of parts of this book that I did genuinely enjoy. I did like the concept of found family with all the friends coming together and supporting each other through hard times. And I thought her friends were very interesting in an otherwise very bland or overdone premise. They added a lot of extra flavor to the story overall, and I definitely wish we had more time to explore them because they came across as half-baked characters. And I will say that the bride really got on my nerves because she was trying so desperately to keep their friendships together that she forced them all to get tattoos, very permanent signs on their body that no doubt when they stopped talking to these people in 10 years, they would instantly regret. And even though Happy Place did not wow me, I decided to give another one of her books a chance. And that was a book by the name of Funny Story. Now, one big grievance I have about these books that are being sold at Target is these ugly stickers that are completely unremovable. And even if you try, you might risk ruining the cover, which I don't appreciate. I really hope that they either make stickers that are easier to tear off or just negate putting them on altogether. Despite the sticker, I will say that this cover is very alluring. I love the color. I love the little graphics and the cartoonish characters on the front. I really do enjoy Emily Henry's covers. I just wish that I liked what's inside way more. I also like how the past 2 books, the titles are much more pithy and short and easy to remember, and I was genuinely intrigued by the premise, the overall story between our protagonists. So Funny Story is about Daphne and Miles, 2 people who recently found themselves dumped by their fiancés. This is an opposites attract love story and also a fake dating love story rolled up into one. When these 2 initially meet, they're actually engaged to other people, Peter and Petra, who are each other's best friends, but their platonic feelings for each other actually turn into mutual attraction, and these 2 were having an emotional affair, and they decide to break off their relationships with Daphne and Miles and pursue one with each other. Daphne and Miles are understandably devastated, and after one drunken night in the bar in which they stumble into each other on accident, the 2 of them decide to not only be roommates, but to also pretend to date in order to make their exes jealous.
And they were roommates.
God, they were roommates.
These 2 eventually learn to overcome their feelings for their lying, cheating exes and start to actually like and date each other. And because Emily Henry cannot help herself, she throws a wrench into the mix in the form of Daphne's estranged father. Personally, I found the introduction to this character unnecessary because he was just there for drama's sake and he offered nothing to the main plot overall. And it got even worse when he introduced his daughter to his new girlfriend named Starfire. Yes, like the Teen Titans character. I don't know what Emily Henry was on when she was writing this book, but she is making some really lazy and overall curious choices when it comes to characters' names. You have Peter and Petra who are dating in this book, and it's just the female and male version of each of their names. The interaction between her and her father didn't really affect Daphne at all. Instead, it just encouraged her to care less about her father, which I don't know why we needed that scene to begin with. It was just there to prolong the ending of the book, which we all saw coming. So Peter finally comes to his senses and realizes that he may have jumped the gun when he started a relationship with Petra, and he realized that having an open and honest relationship with her was not as fun as when they were flirting as friends, dating other people who didn't deserve to be cheated on. So he goes back to Harriet and begs for her to take him back. This is when Harriet realizes that she does indeed love Miles, and then she ditches Peter and she goes to confess her love for him, and everything is wrapped up nice and tight in a bow. And she finds out that he also was approached by Petra after her breakup with Peter, and both of them have very conflicting stories in which they both came to the same conclusion, that they made a huge mistake and that they really wanted to be together with their exes after all. Tale as old as time. So Harriet goes to Miles and tells him that she doesn't want to be with Peter, she wants to be with him. And then they both live happily ever after. Despite the fact that the characters made decisions that I didn't exactly agree with, and they could be quite annoying at times. I like this way more than Happy Place, and I will have to give it a 2 out of 5 stars. Finally, just when I thought that it couldn't get any better, this year's latest addition to the Emily Henry universe, Great Big Beautiful Life, really did surprise me. I could not believe how much I enjoyed this book. I went into it thinking that it was just going to be like all the other Emily Henry books, and this one pleasantly surprised me because it was way more of a historical fiction romance, like the biopics that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes. It made it even that more pleasurable. I have heard people on the opposite side of the spectrum who've told me that they didn't like the fact that it focused too much on the past generations and her ancestors, so there are a lot of conflicting feelings about this book. But if you are not a fan of romance books and you like more historical fiction, I definitely would encourage you to pick this one up, because this is a book that actually diverts the most away from the Emily Henry formula, even though it will check off a lot of those boxes on the bingo card. And I really did appreciate Emily Henry stepping outside of her comfort zone and trying something new, because this book really felt much more like a literary fiction book, which is way more up my alley, and I really hope that she continues this trend, assuming that other people liked it just as much. So this book follows our FMC Alice Scott, who is traveling to Little Crescent Island in Georgia to see the renowned Margaret Ives and write a book about her family. However, when she gets there, she realizes a slight issue. There's another writer there by the name of Hayden who is competing with her for the role of writing Margaret Ives' memoir, and may the best writer win. Alice is enthralled by the story of the Ives. So the Ives family actually rose to prominence during the gold rush, in which Margaret Ives' great-grandfather mined silver ore and got very wealthy off of that because of the lack of competition. He also threw his partner under the bus, who died shortly after due to the fact that he was penniless, drunk, and a gambler. So Lawrence Ives used his newfound wealth in order to invest in other things like media. He bought out quite a few newspapers and then hired his son Gerald to take over the industry after he was done. So Gerald married Rosalind but had a tumultuous affair with Nina, who one day left under mysterious circumstances to Europe to go to this mental asylum, where she met this doctor and they got married, and she broke off her relationship with Gerald. Now Gerald had a son named Frederick, who is Margaret's father. Now, Frederick was a very lazy person, and he took over the movie industry, or Royal Pictures, which was the Ives-owned movie studio, and that's when he met his wife, Doris, who was an up-and-coming female director. Now, the two of them had Margaret, and even though their marriage did not last, they still were very good friends and maintained a friendship that lasted all the way until both of them passed. Now, Margaret had a sister named Laura, and she and Laura, one day when they were teenagers, snuck out to go to this concert where this rock star named Cosmo was playing, and this is met her future husband. Now at the concert, they both sustained injuries from the mosh pit, and their picture of their bruised and bloody faces ended up on the paper. Cosmo saw it and he felt really bad, so he went to go apologize to Margaret. And that little meet cute was the start of their whirlwind romance. They fell in love instantly, got married, and then tried to get pregnant. However, during that time, it also marked the slow descent of Margaret's sister, Laura. Now Laura really struggled a lot with mental health. She was very upset at the loss of their grandfather, and she fell into a cult run by a Dr. Atwood. Dr. Atwood was very manipulative and psychologically traumatized Laura to the point where she did not trust her own family because he deemed them to be the sole reason of why she was in so much mental turmoil. Now, Margaret was desperate to get her sister out of the cult, and Laura soon realized that Dr. Atwood was not all who he said he was. Laura helped them arrest him for distributing weapons illegally in the hopes of assassinating certain politicians in power at that time. And then Laura goes back home only to realize that she doesn't really belong there. She runs away, eventually does get married and have a family of her own before she passed. Now at this point, when Alice is interviewing Margaret, she is the last remaining Ives, or so she thinks. And as she's listening to this story, Alice and Hayden are hanging out at Margaret Ives' house because they're both living there the whole month to write her story, and they started to get to know each other better, strike up a friendship that eventually turns into a mutual attraction. The two of them actually wind up sleeping outside at some point and eventually hooking up. The only problem is that Alice makes this grandiose discovery about Hayden's true identity. He is actually related to the Ives family. And after this eureka moment, she feels so guilty that Margaret is asking her to keep this secret. She decides to leave and break up with him in the obligatory third act breakup scene. She goes home, makes amends with her mother, her friends come to cheer her up, and then Hayden eventually comes and asks her to take him back. Now at this time, Alice also realizes that she has fallen pregnant with his child. Keep in mind, these people only met a month ago. Alice only knew about him from a distance. He did not know that she existed until until they both ended up at Little Crescent Island. Then the two of them decide to keep the baby, get married, and write the book together. Of course, the book is a smash hit. Their daughter is happy and healthy, and the heir to inherit what is left of the Ives' fortune. Was it Alice's secret motivation to keep the baby just so she can have an inkling of that wealth? We'll never know. My conspiracy theory was that Alice was more motivated to keep the baby because she knew that it would belong in a wealthy family, but that's just me and my jaded opinion. But it just seems very suspicious as she didn't want children up until this point, and the minute that she realized that she was carrying the baby of one of the wealthiest millionaires in the whole country, just saying, it seems a little sus. So like I mentioned before, I really like the concept of the memoir and the illustrious Ives family that was treated as this American royal family. This entire story was full of scandals and illegitimate children and cults that ended on a much better note for everyone involved, unlike Beachread, which was harrowing and quite traumatizing when I read it. So I really did enjoy how Emily Henry has been veering into different avenues and testing the waters for a different genre that more or less falls into what I believe she really wants to write, which is literary fiction. She didn't make a point in Beachread where she bemoaned the fact that women are only expected to write romance and they aren't taken seriously in the literacy fiction realm, which in my eyes is completely untrue because most of my favorite lit fic authors are women. So I don't really see the main argument that Emily Henry was trying to make there, other than the fact that I believe she hadn't really honed her craft. But here I really do see her trying. Throughout these books, I can see her journey and how she's grown and matured as an author to get to this point. Because in this book, she was way more prosaic. I highlighted way more positive lines that I did in her previous books, but apparently a lot of her diehard fans haven't been singing its praises, which is tragic because I personally liked it and I'm not a huge fan of Emily Henry. I still found her falling into the same traps as she usually does, with the added bonus of the surprise pregnancy at the very end. And I don't know if I'm going crazy. You guys let me know. I have been noticing a startling amount of books that have included surprise pregnancies from brand new relationships, mind you, in which the woman falls pregnant after a month after she's having a difficult time in the workplace, and then the book is encouraging her to assume this role of motherhood because it comes most naturally to women, right? They need to be in the house taking care of the child for the man so he can achieve his true destiny of being a Pulitzer Prize winning author or a world-renowned chef. For reference, the other book was Strawberry Patch Pancake House by Laura Gilmore, and it shocked me because neither of these authors in the past have ever used that as a literary element in any of their books, and all of a sudden now, both of them at the same time decided to throw in a surprise pregnancy because a woman was struggling with her life and her passion, and I guess the natural solution to all of women's problems is motherhood. And please understand that I'm saying this as a child-free person, so take this with a grain of salt, but I don't like the recklessness when it comes to using protection, especially when it comes to intimate relationships with men. And the fact that both of these books completely disregarded a woman in her autonomy and used this baby as a magical band-aid to make her life better because everything else was falling apart, I don't think that's a very healthy way to look at children or motherhood as this plan B when your job doesn't work out or when your dreams come crumbling down around you and nothing else works. Oh, don't worry, you can just be a mother, right? And then all of a sudden, all of life will make sense. Even more distressing is the fact that they're painting this as this fairy tale ending where the man or the father of the baby is more than willing to take in this complete stranger who's carrying his child to care for them and love for them. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think it is a bit misleading to create this narrative instead of putting the onus on the men to wrap up their situation. Like, it's not rocket science, babe. Wrap it up. I just had conflicting feelings about that because I appreciated how her other books were much more child-free and they focus more on the relationship rather than the parenting side of it. I think motherhood is a great, big, beautiful thing. See what I did there? But having children is a huge responsibility, and treating it with this kind of recklessness is almost irresponsible when it comes to the realm of romance, because this is a fantasy, this is a fairy tale, this isn't going to happen to everyone. Unfortunately, not all the men are going to step up to the plate and take that responsibility, so I'm just wondering what the purpose of having that child was, other than to continue the generation of Ives after her and to secure her financial situation, might I add. Smart move, girl, get that bag however you can. But I just thought it was a huge shocker that she would throw that in at the very last minute. These people just met a month ago. Keep that in mind. They just met, they only started officially dating a week ago, and now they're pregnant with their first child. I don't think I would have as much of a problem with this trope if the two of them had known each other for a lot longer and were much more established in themselves and their partnership when they had a child. There's so many things you still still have to learn about this person, that you can't learn about them in 1 month. I know I'm taking this too seriously because these are fictional people and it doesn't matter. 2 books with the exact same ending, so take that with what you will. That was Great Big Beautiful Life, which I rated a 3 out of 5 stars, and to this day, I think it is my favorite Emily Henry book, and this would probably be the only book of hers that I do recommend. I just want to warn you guys ahead of time, it's very different. It does involve quite a few more content warnings than her previous books, but I definitely think it's worth your time. In conclusion, I think I am just over Emily Henry books. She's just not my cup of tea, and even though I really did like her latest entry, 1 for 6 is not exactly the best track record. Like Ali Hazelwood, many of her books are more or less the same. They all follow the same pattern, they're all very predictable, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because at the end of the day, many of her fans like the fact that Emily Henry is formulaic and predictable. But for me personally, I think I am just done with Emily Henry. I'm going to move on and find better books that I will actually enjoy. Alright everyone, that was the video. Thank you so much to those of you who stayed on this long. Leave a little sun in the comments down below if you made it all the way to the end. Let me know what you guys think of Emily Henry. Do you like her books? Which one's your favorite? Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. Let me know if you want me to do any rant reviews on any of these books specifically. I do have a video up about Great Big Beautiful Life where I do delve more into the story and the plot, and I read passages from the book so that way you can hear the difference in Emily Henry's tone and writing style, because I really do think that she is greatly improving, and I hope that she does nothing but get better from here. Thanks again, you guys, for sticking around. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and don't forget to keep reading, and I'll see you next time.